Hello everyone, I'm Eric of the ClanMcCracken, and today's topic will be Zelda. Now that I've finished Breath of the Wild, I've been thinking about where it can fit inside the Zelda timeline. The evidence, as it's been presented, says the game cannot take place before the split, but which timeline does it fit into? My first instinct was to place it in the Downfall timeline. The placement of landmarks throughout Hyrule lines up eerily well with the map of Link to the Past. Then you look at the placement of the Master Sword in the Lost Woods, right where it was left at the end of Link to the Past. Promotional artwork of the Master Sword seems to have been deliberately modeled after the official artwork of Link to the Past as well. And finally, you have the villain itself, Ganon. Ganon has been the villain about just about every Zelda game to date, but in the child and adult timelines, there's always an element of Ganondorf present as well. Not so in the Downfall timeline. It is always Ganon without Ganondorf, just as it is in this game. All of this seems to point to the game taking place in the Downfall timeline. Next, I tried to find evidence of place Breath of the Wild within the child timeline. The presence of the Great Hylia Bridge stood out immediately, as up until this point, the bridge had only existed in Twilight Princess. And as you can see, the bridges are pretty similar in appearance, supporting the same broken pillars and the same battlement decorations on top. Furthermore, in the memory of Link's knighting ceremony, the Hero of Twilight is directly referenced in Zelda's speech, along with the Hero of Time and the Hero of Sky. That alone should be enough evidence to convince people that Breath of the Wild takes place in the child timeline. Lastly, we have the adult timeline. The Rito, who you meet along your adventures, are a race that have only been found in the adult timeline up to this point. The story goes that they evolved from the Zora when the gods flooded Hyrule. Another race that appears in this game that has only ever been found in the adult timeline is the Koroks. I find it interesting that these two races were pulled out of Wind Waker, mostly because in Wind Waker the Rito sage Medley and the Korok sage Makar were the two responsible for unsealing the Master Sword's power. Their inclusion cannot have been an accident. Plus, the rock salt from the ancient sea is found all over the map. With all this evidence, Breath of the Wild does not directly fit into any of the timelines as it currently exists. The only way to get it to fit is to either create a fourth timeline, or find some way that the three divergent timelines eventually grew back together. As I don't really like the idea of creating a fourth timeline just to place this game, I will explore the later idea. My theory is that at some point after the latest game in each timeline, Adventures of Link, Four Sword Adventure, and Spirit Tracks, and yet still at least 10,000 years prior to Breath of the Wild, some event happened and caused the timelines to merge. Much like how a river could split into three tributaries and much further downstream recombine back into a single river. As for what this event could be, I have no idea. But this is the only possible way to include Breath of the Wild in the current timeline without giving it its own timeline. As a side note of interest, I had originally planned on linking Breath of the Wild through Hyrule Warriors. Ultimately, I decided against it because Hyrule Warriors is considered an alternate universe and therefore non-canon. However, it does present an interesting launching point because it shows that the creators have at least considered the possibility of combining characters from separate timelines. I think that at least in part, Breath of the Wild was conceived with Hyrule Warriors in mind.